This is you. You're face down on the steering wheel of a car you don't recognize, in a parking garage that could be anywhere, and the last thing you remember is having breakfast on a Tuesday. The clock on the dashboard says it's Thursday. You've lost 41 hours. Your mouth tastes like copper and chemicals, and there's dried blood on the back of your left hand that isn't from a cut you can find. You sit up slowly. Your head feels like something inside it got rearranged. Not pain exactly. More like the specific wrongness of furniture moved 2 inches in every direction. You know where everything is supposed to be, but nothing is quite where you left it. The car is a black Chevy Tahoe, clean, no plates. Rental sticker ghost on the windshield where someone peeled it off recently. Your wallet is in the cup holder. Your phone is not. Your wallet has $340 cash, a driver's license with your face and a name you recognize as yours, 2 credit cards, and a key card for a hotel you've never heard of. You sit with that for a second. Then you pop the trunk. $2 million. Wrapped in vacuum-sealed plastic, stacked in 4 duffel bags with military precision, the kind of organization that communicates experience. You're looking at 20 neat packages of $100,000 each, and you know that not because you counted, but because something in the back of your brain, some part that apparently stayed awake while the rest of you went dark, does the math in under a second and lands on 2 million like it's a familiar number. That terrifies you more than the money. You close the trunk. You get back in the car. You breathe. Here's the inventory of things you know. Your name. Your age. Where you grew up. Fragments of a life that feel genuine. Here's the inventory of things you don't know. Where you've been for 41 hours. Whose money is in your trunk. Who put it there. Whether you put it there. And most importantly, whether the people who owned it before it ended up in your trunk are currently looking for it with the kind of determination that ends in unmarked graves. You need information before you need anything else. The hotel keycard is your first move. The Meridian is a mid-tier business hotel 4 blocks from the parking garage, the kind of place that asks no questions and keeps no stories. You find the room on the 7th floor. It's been lived in, not ransacked, lived in. 2 days of clothes. A laptop you don't have the password to. A burner phone with 3 numbers saved under no names, just colors. Red, blue, green. And a legal pad on the desk, with your handwriting covering 3 pages in a script so cramped and urgent, it barely looks like yours. You sit on the bed and read it. It takes you 11 minutes to understand what you built for yourself. And by the end, you're sitting very still with the legal pad in both hands, and the quiet, dawning comprehension that the person who wrote these notes was operating at a frequency you can't currently access. The notes are instructions. Not a journal. Instructions. As if the version of you that was conscious knew the version of you waking up would be exactly this lost and planned for it. The summary, reconstructed. You were a forensic accountant. Not the kind that works for firms. The kind that governments occasionally contact through intermediaries when they need financial crime investigated off the books. Quietly, with no paper trail connecting the work to any agency. You were good. Past tense matters here. Because 8 days ago, according to your own notes, you were hired to trace the origin of a $40 million fund that had moved through 7 countries in 90 days. Standard architecture. Layered shells, correspondent banking, a few obliging institutions and jurisdictions that treat financial secrecy like a religion. Except somewhere in the trace, you found something that wasn't supposed to be findable. The money wasn't criminal in the traditional sense. It wasn't cartel. It wasn't trafficking. It was operational funding for a domestic intelligence program that officially does not exist, run by people inside a government building in Washington who have the specific kind of authority that makes inconvenient discoveries go away quietly. You found it anyway, because you're built for this. Because finding the thing nobody else found is the only professional identity you've ever had. According to your notes, you had 2 days before your contact went dark, and you understood that the investigation had been compromised. So you did 2 things. First, you extracted the most sensitive documentation, financial records, transaction chains, names, and encrypted it on a device you mailed to an address in the notes. Second, you liquidated $2 million from a secondary fund connected to the operation. Not theft, insurance. You needed something they'd want back badly enough to negotiate instead of disappear you. Smart. Terrifying. But smart. The problem is that whatever they used to compromise you, and your notes say you suspected you'd been drugged at a meeting on Tuesday afternoon, a precautionary measure to let them search you and your equipment, burned 41 hours clean out of your memory. You woke up in their car, which means at some point in those missing hours, someone made a decision not to kill you, and instead to put you back in play. That means they haven't found the documentation. That means they need you conscious and functional enough to tell them where it is. That means you have leverage. That also means the clock is running. You call Blue first because the notes say Blue is the safest call. It rings twice. A woman answers with a single word, a location. You recognize it. You hang up. The location is a Vietnamese restaurant in a part of the city that discourages cameras. You arrive 20 minutes later and find a woman in her late 50s at a corner table, small and precise, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades in rooms where stillness was survival. She looks at you the way a doctor looks at a patient whose chart she already read. She says your name. She says she wasn't sure you'd remember her. You tell her you don't, that you have notes, that you need her to fill the gaps. She looks at the legal pad you slide across the table, and her expression doesn't change, but her hands do. They go very flat and very still on the tabletop, which tells you the notes are accurate enough to be alarming. Her name is Carla. She was your handler for 3 years. She explains the rest. The program you uncovered is called something bureaucratic and meaningless on paper. What it actually does is fund political outcomes in domestic elections through foreign financial routing, which is several categories of federal crime wrapped in a structure so sophisticated that proving it would take exactly the kind of forensic work you do. 2 sitting members of a Senate Oversight Committee are on the payroll. 3 senior officials at the agency that hired you to investigate the fund that turned out to be theirs, are also involved. The investigation was a test. They suspected a leak was pointing investigators toward the operation, so they hired an outside contractor through a cutout, watched to see what he found, and when he found everything, they moved on him. You were supposed to be a loose end. The fact that you're sitting in a Vietnamese restaurant instead of at the bottom of a river means someone inside the operation blinked. Someone decided that killing a forensic accountant would generate exactly the kind of attention they couldn't afford right now, 6 weeks before a midterm election. So they took the softer option. Wiped your short-term memory with a benzodiazepine cocktail, searched everything, didn't find the documentation, and put you back hoping you'd either stay confused or come to them. Carla says they'll come to you within 24 hours. They'll offer a deal. Return the documentation and the $2 million, sign an NDA with teeth, and walk away with your life and a quiet wire transfer to an account they'll control forever, which means they'll own you from that point forward. She says this like someone reading a sentence they've read before. You ask her what the alternative is. She slides a business card across the table. No name on it. Just a number and a 3-letter identifier you recognize from your notes. A federal prosecutor in the Public Corruption Unit who has been building a parallel case for 16 months and is missing exactly the kind of financial documentation you're currently holding in an envelope in a mail facility 2 miles from where you're sitting. You look at the card. You look at Carla. You ask her the honest question. If you hand over the documentation and $2 million in evidence to a federal prosecutor, what happens to you? She says, investigated probably, charged possibly, depending on how the $2 million gets classified. Uncomfortable certainly, for a long time. But alive, and not owned, and not the kind of leverage they can use forever. You think about the version of you that wrote those notes. Cramped, urgent handwriting, operating on borrowed time, building an escape route for a self he knew would wake up confused and scared. That version of you had already made the decision. The notes aren't instructions for choosing. They're instructions for following through on a choice already made. You take the card. The next 18 hours move like a controlled demolition. You retrieve the envelope from the mail facility, a USB drive, and 40 pages of printed transaction records, organized with the meticulous clarity of someone who knew they might not be around to explain them in person. You meet the prosecutor in a parking structure at 6 in the morning. She's been awake all night. She looks at the first 3 pages and stops talking for a long time. Then she says, "This is enough." 2 words. The specific economy of someone who doesn't overstate things. You hand over the drive. You hand over the documentation. You tell her about the $2 million, and she tells you not to touch it, that it becomes evidence, that its provenance is actually cleaner than you think because the transaction chain traces it directly to the operation's secondary fund, and that makes it a gift, evidentiarily speaking. You ask about your exposure. She says there's a framework for people in your position. Cooperation, documentation, voluntary disclosure. She says the $2 million helps because walking away from it demonstrates intent that a jury understands immediately. She says it won't be clean, but it won't be prison. You tell her about the people who'll come for you in the next few hours. She makes a call. By 9 in the morning, there are federal agents at the Meridian. By noon, 3 of the people named in your documentation have been contacted by investigators. By 3 in the afternoon, the operation that didn't officially exist is suddenly existing very loudly in the offices of 2 Senate oversight committees whose other members are discovering, with considerable alarm, what their colleagues were funding. They never come for you. Not because they forgot, because the moment the documentation surfaced, making you disappear became the single most counterproductive move available to them. You're the cooperating witness. You're the source. Touching you now is the same as standing in front of a courtroom and confessing. Checkmate. The kind that was built 41 hours ago by a version of you running on adrenaline and borrowed time, who trusted that the version waking up confused in a parking garage would be scared enough to follow the notes and stubborn enough to follow them all the way. The legal process takes 14 months. You are investigated. You are deposed 11 times. You sit across from federal attorneys who are trying to find the angle where you become a defendant instead of a witness. And every time they run into the same wall, you walked away from $2 million and handed them a case they'd been trying to build for a year and a half. That's not the behavior of someone running a scheme. That's the behavior of someone who found something and couldn't unknow it. You are not charged. 2 of the Senate committee members resign before indictments. 1 doesn't, and gets indicted anyway, which is the kind of math that makes you understand why Carla had that expression at the Vietnamese restaurant. The senior officials are arrested on a Tuesday morning with the specific efficiency of people who'd been preparing for this and couldn't outrun the preparation. The program is formally acknowledged, investigated, and shut down in the kind of congressional hearing that gets covered for a week and then slides into the long archive of things the public briefly understood and then let go. Carla disappears. Not the bad kind of disappearing. She just stops being contactable, which in her line of work means she successfully became someone else somewhere quieter. You hope she's drinking good coffee. Your memory, the 41 missing hours, never fully comes back. The neurologist says that's normal for the compound they used, that the encoding simply didn't happen during the window, that those hours are genuinely gone and not hiding somewhere retrievable. You spend a few weeks being bothered by that, and then you stop being bothered by it, because the hours that are missing are not the hours that mattered. The hours that mattered are the ones you can remember clearly. The parking garage, the legal pad, the Vietnamese restaurant, the prosecutor's face reading page 3. Those you have. You leave forensic work. Not because you can't do it. You can, better than ever. The case having demonstrated a professional ceiling most people in your field will never touch. You leave because the version of you that chose this career made a series of assumptions about what the job was and who commissioned it and what happened to the findings, and none of those assumptions survived contact with a Tuesday afternoon meeting and a $40 million fund that went all the way to the top. You open a small consulting practice. Tax structure, financial compliance, the honest kind of work that fills an honest kind of life. The clients are boring. The hours are regular. Nobody drugs you and puts you in a parking garage. On the last day of the legal process, the prosecutor calls you with the final disposition. You're standing in your kitchen making coffee when she tells you it's done. You say thank you. She says you did the hard part. There's a pause, and then she says the sentence that will stay with you. That the documentation was so clean, so precisely organized, so clearly built by someone who knew it had to stand alone without explanation, that the legal team initially assumed it had been assembled over weeks. When they found out it had been compiled in under 6 hours by someone who knew they were about to be compromised, it changed the way they understood the whole case. You think about the cramped handwriting on the legal pad, the person who built the escape route. You tell the prosecutor you barely remember writing any of it. She says that's probably why it worked. That whoever you were in those 6 hours wasn't second-guessing, wasn't scared yet, was just doing the only thing he knew how to do, as well as he'd ever done it. You hang up, you drink your coffee. The version of you that woke up in that parking garage, scared and hollow and missing 41 hours, followed the notes all the way to the end. That feels like enough. That feels like everything.